There we are. I think I'll just sit right over here and we can just chew the fat.
Pull the chair over close if you want to.
This is Friday, isn't it? Just 2 days
Friday.
before
Friday,
Valentine's
12th.
Day, so it must be the 12th of February of
12th.
1965. And
That's right.
as a part of the Living Legend Library that's now being set up at Oklahoma Christian College, we're in the offices now of former Governor Roy J. Turner, who, incidentally, of the many people that we've talked with this week, Governor, you're one of the few native Oklahomans.
Yes, Bob Kerr was a native Oklahoman. He was the first native Oklahoma governor. I was second.
That is correct, but it seems not necessarily odd, but perhaps due to the youth of the state and
That's
so
right.
forth, that many people came in here.
That's where somebody had to come here.
Somebody had to come in and get everything started.
Get everything started. That's right.
Now, where were you born, Governor?
Born in Lincoln County on a farm, about 12 miles north of Chandler.
And your parents were farmers, your father?
Yes, father was a farmer. We later moved into a little town, and my father, my grandfather, and two uncles and a cousin homesteaded there in the Second Fox Country when it opened in 1891. I was born there in 1894.
And you spent, well, your youth you spent there, right?
Well, we moved into the little town of Kendrick, and my father ran a livery stable. And he passed away when I was 15 years old, and I came to Oklahoma City. And I went to business college, Hill's Business College, incidentally. It's still
in operation.
Still in operation here in Bighorn. It was the corner of Main and Broadway at that time, over a bank. And at 16 years old, I went to work for Morrison Company, Packers, out the stockyards here in the accounting department and bookkeeper. And
How long did you stay there?
about 5 years. And then I decided I wanted to get some sales experience, and landed a job with Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company. And I had that until I went to service in World War I. And then when I came back, I could have gone back to that job. They saved their jobs, like they all did, save a job for me. But I decided that I was going down to Texas and get rich in the oil business. But I didn't get rich there. And then the next move I made, I went out to San Francisco to be in business with an uncle. Married my aunt, my mother's sister. And
What kind of business was that?
that was the roofing business. And he was getting up in years, and she was back here visiting my mother. And she made it sound pretty attractive, but I didn't like it. It was pretty much a seasonal thing, and I didn't care for it as it was set up. And I finally got down to Florida. I started a business, incidentally, though, a specialty business of office supply specialties in San Francisco without any money. And it seemed like it was going to go, and moved to Chicago. And then finally I gave it up, went to Florida. The Florida real estate boom attracted my attention, and I went down there in 1923 and was there until 1928 when I came back to Oklahoma City. Hitchhiked back.
Come right back home again.
Came right back. That was, and of course the Florida boom was all over, and the state was in bad shape down there. I did take over before I left there. Some folks, a banker there that used to be in Oklahoma City, talked to Bill Cordell, who used to be Secretary of the State Election Board out here, and had worked for Mr. McAllister before he went to Florida. Talked us into taking over a well that was drilling for oil south of near Monticello, Florida, right close to the Georgia line. And the real estate people they were grabbing at anything, maybe to bring back some business. And so we agreed to take that over, and he agreed to help us raise some money to dig it on down, make a test out of it. And I fought that thing. I finally got it down. Bill came back. He wasn't much point in him staying there because it was kind of a slow process, and he had a chance to come back to his old job, and he did. And so I stayed with it until we got down and made a test. Of course, we didn't get any oil. Then the Oklahoma City field out here was, they already had gas, and they were getting down to the bottom, testing that discovery well. And so I came back here and was here just a little while before that came in, and I watched it, and that's when Mr. F.E. Harper and I started up here in partnership, trying to get in the oil business, and we finally got in. And he came up, he'd been down there too, and I knew him here before we ever got in Florida, when we were kids around here. And so that's the way we got started getting in the oil business, just trying to latch on to some little thing out here. It took us quite a while to get the...
I imagine there was a great deal of competition that time, wasn't
Well, there was. It was down where the discovery well was. It was all taken anyway. All you could deal in would be some royalty. All the leases were gone. But it started moving up toward town and toward the river. And that's where we got our toehold, down here in this river bottom. We got some town lots. And we worked pretty fast and hard at that. And by that time, there wasn't much competition. The oil business, oil was bringing 25 cents a barrel, 10 cents a barrel, or whatever you get for it. That's when Governor Murray shut the field down. The companies were buying nothing. So if anybody down there did any business, they had to do business with somebody like us. And we didn't have money. But we got a toehold there and got a little start, and just kept going on up through town. And
About where would that area be now?
right down
Same
on, right
area,
on the
but I
river,
mean,
right on the river.
right on the river.
Walnut Grove is one of the deals we were in. We turned that to Phillips, and they drilled 22 wells on the leases we turned to them after they completed the leasing and had quite titles. They were tax titles and every kind of titles for the world down there. See, the river had been overflowing down in there. We had lots right in the old riverbed. The river changed its course. It does. And
Well, that was after the flood then, wasn't it?
yes, that was
After the river had changed
after the
its
big
course.
flood, the last big flood they had. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Speaking of the oil, this, as you know, this is a matter of record. This is not for, you might say, broadcast purposes, but as a living library and for research and history. Wasn't there quite an active go about getting the oil fields into the city?
Well, yes.
You were engaged in that,
Yes.
weren't you?
They had, the first, Walnut Grove was in the city, and you had to get a permit. So they set up an ordinance that you could drill a well to the block if the block contained as much as 2.5 acres, up to 5 acres. If it contained 7.5, you could drill 2 wells, something like that. And but just immediately east of Walnut Grove, there south of Reno, that was not in the city, and so there were quite a number of wells drilled in there on just a few lots, and we had some of that. And, in fact, we were in 3 or 4 wells in there that we retained an interest in that other people drilled. We didn't have the money to drill them. That was about the first money we took out.
Well, weren't you the one?
Then they later it was restricted above 4th Street. No drilling above 4th Street. And they took in a couple of blocks wide there up to 6, I think. That was in the beginning as a buffer zone. They could participate in the wells south there on 4th Street. those people, but you couldn't drill on them. Then then they passed an ordinance that you had to have a vote of the city if you extended it any further. So we were very active in that. By that time, we'd gotten up there. We had a lot of those lots. We had a lot of them.
Yeah.
And in fact, we had 80 acres up there, right straight across from 6th Street. No, we were leasing on 6th Street. We were leasing south of 6th Street. It must have been the 5th. I think 5th Street was the line in the beginning. And then we leased from 5th Street up to about 8th, about 3 blocks wide, all strip all through there. And then we had to call an election. After we leased that up, we got Phillips as a partner in there to develop it. And we had to hold an election in the whole city, and it carried.
For what? For permission?
For permission, yeah. They passed an ordinance, and the city council had passed an ordinance that it couldn't be extended without a vote of the whole town. And so we had to go.
Why would they do that? Or why did they, rather?
They were opposed to bringing it on up toward the Capitol and in there, into Lincoln Terrace. They fought us very hard. But the folks thought there was oil there. There was no question about it. We knew it then.
You knew that from your
Oh, yes.
studies.
We knew that from the wells immediately adjoining it, you know, and it was fine. It was lots of oil in there. And so it was a hard-fought election. The paper fought it very hard. They had ideas that would burn up the town and spoil Lincoln Terrace and so on. Then later on, and Governor Murray, when he was governor, he drew a ring a mile around the Capitol and said, "You can't drill in here." And after he went out of office, well, that went out with him. So the state had a lot of good valuable oil land up there, and Governor Marland decided he wanted to get that money, and so they started drilling around the Capitol.
Oil, no question, has played an extremely important part in the history of the city, hasn't it?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. This was, of course, the first big break. But after this, from here on west, more and more all the time, it's more important. See, we have a lot of big companies here now, and they were all in Tulsa before. And oil has played a very big part, and still is, as a matter of fact. There's lots of money spent here by a lot of oil people, independents and major companies. And they keep, some of them have as big an office here as they do any place, most any place.
It must have been quite an interesting time in your life, wasn't it?
Oh, it was very interesting. It was something I liked, and we worked hard at it, and we did good. It was good to us. Oklahoma City had been very good to me. Oklahoma all around, a lot of ways.
When did you get married, and to whom? What was your wife's maiden name?
Ms. Turner, President Ms. Turner, is my second wife. My first wife passed away, and I married the President Ms. Turner in 1937. Had 2 children, and so she's the one that went through the governor's office with me.
Right.
Jessica.
What happened to Mr. Harper?
He passed away 4 years ago, I think. 4, maybe it's 5. Time goes.
Yes.
And let's see, this is 60 or 61.
In the meantime, were you...
I sold my interest in that partnership to him in 1955.
And then what did you do? Did you continue on
independently?
independently?
I did some, but then I finally just sort of dropped out of the oil business, and of course I had the ranch at Sulphur.
I was going to say, when did you start to get into extensive ranching?
Well, we started, and Mr. Harper was my partner in that at the beginning. And we got into the purebred business, which I liked, and we agreed to get into it. We started in 1933 buying the land. We bought 3 tracts, 3 different ranches, small. They had been together one time, but got split up back during the Depression. And but we put 3 of them together, and we had some land inside of the blocks that we leased. Some of it was in restricted Indian land. And as we went along, that came on the market, and I bought it. I bought Mr. Harper's interest in the ranch in 1938, and I owned it myself from there on. And but actually got in the purebred Hereford business. Started in 1935, a little bit, and then really got in it in 1937 after we were able to. We bought a lot of fine cattle when Mr. Hazlett, who'd been in the business about 40 years, at El Dorado, Kansas, and he had a fine his herd had a great reputation, and they dispersed that herd, and Harper and I bought quite a lot of those cattle. We had to help.
Well, you really got into it extensively, didn't you?
Yes, and he didn't like the purebred business, and I did, and it was either a question of him taking it or just getting rid of it, or I didn't want to be in the commercial and of like he wanted to be in, and so it was a buy or sell deal, and he decided that he let me have it.
You really enjoyed that, didn't you?
Yes. Yeah, that was one of the, it was a great thing. It's a fine herd today. I sold it, sold the ranch to Winthrop Rockefeller. It'll be 2 years in May. And it's going good. And they still have a fine herd.
He's astute enough to know a good thing when he sees it.
Yeah, well, he likes that business too. He likes it. He was in the Santa Cruz business. He'd talked to me before. Something about getting some Herefords and doing some experimental work, but he really has a Hereford herd there now. There's right about 10,000 acres there, including about 500 acres of irrigated farmland that I developed and drilled water wells to. Well, it's watered with 2 wells that I discovered that there was water under there like that. I drilled a couple of wells for oil there, and discovered all that fresh water. A tremendous amount of it. Big water reservoir there.
Yes.
Mr. Green.
Well, that's all right. Have him come in. That's all right. We'll just keep on talking. And I recall at one time being down there at the ranch for some affair or another, and I know that many people remarked at that time that you, how you looked, how happy you looked down there. You're having such a big time.
Well, I enjoyed it. We all enjoyed it. We all liked it. The kids liked to be there. Bill wasn't interested in carrying it on, and Miss Turner liked it, and it was good for our health. It was good for me, and I felt like it was doing some good. We had annually. So after 1940, we had a field day for the 4-H and the future for the 4-H clubs and the future farmers. One of the finest things I think the ranch did was to make that contribution, because they seem to get a lot of good out of it. I've heard it. Well, I think maybe more than I realized for a long time, but in years as they've gone by, I've heard some fine stories about some of the boys, what they made of, well, even the little old money they got way back there.
Right.
1940 did them a lot of good. I mean, we had a little premium money, didn't amount to much. Team made $50, the winning team, but it went down to about 20 places. And I remember one boy out at Fort Cobb that got $20, and he took that $20 and ran it up.
Do you recall, is Mr. Rockefeller carrying that on?
Yes. They missed the first year because we weren't prepared for it. They had it this past year.
Right.
Yeah. They didn't have it in '63. And
Don, have you met Governor? Don Green, this
Turner?
Governor
Got to
Turner.
meet you,
That'd
Don.
make your acquaintance,
Thanks.
shocking acquaintance there.
Yes, sir. Well, that's what this carpet does to.
Don is the professor of history out at Oklahoma Christian
Oh,
College.
yes. Oh, yes.
And he's going to be,
Are you from?
this is one of his direct responsibilities, this Living Legend Library.
Well, I think it's
Vitally
a
interested in it.
fine thing.
Then let's get into some politics, Governor.
All right, sir.
How did you
Well,
get-
I was a political accident. I just drifted into it. I had no design on being a politician at any time. But the various things I was in, I like the oil business as an independent. I was active in their association, IPA, or all of the oil associations, and I'd seem to get on committees right along if something had to be done, and part of which was legislation that comes up that interests the oil people. I had the ranch. I'd get on all those committees, and then after the school board scandal here, I guess I could say drafted because
What year was that? You recall?
1939.
1939.
Yes. We were having a school board election, and I went to a meeting call to help get somebody to run for. There were 2 or 3 places. Well, one, they had some people like Wiley Richardson, and they had another 2 that had already agreed. But they needed one more. It was a 9-member board at that time. And but they needed one more from Ward 2, and I lived over there on 15th Street. And needed one more from Ward 1. And we've had a meeting and they called us and asked us to come help out with it. Went over there, and finally they got to looking at me. And we were over to Oklahoma Club. We'd had a luncheon, I guess. I suppose it was. And so finally, I said, well, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll give Earl Miller my filing application. And they were talking about getting him to run. And I said, I'll give my application to Earl Miller. And if he files his, he can file mine. And he did. So I was on the school board 7 years. And I resigned. And then I got into the education business, you see. and worked out the legislature there and worked, Bob Kerr was governor, on getting the teachers' retirement plan set up. Getting legislation passed for it. I could see the urgent need for it because we had a lot of old ladies around here that you just had to keep them to work or they'd starve to death. What are you going to do with them?
Right.
You can't shoot them. You gotta. So that's set up so they can help set themselves up a retirement fund, and then of course the state has to had to participate in it. I guess they still do, perhaps. I don't know. Maybe it's self-supporting now. But then I got when Governor Phillips ran for governor. We at that time couldn't do a lot, but we knew some of the folks that were supporting him, and we got in and helped him some. And when Bob Kerr ran for governor, I did quite a little bit in that. I mean, at that time I had all these contacts.
You were active in his campaign.
Yes, I was active in his campaign, and through all of that, I got to know the legislature. I got to know them all, knew them well. And they one time they sent it out before I ran for governor. Bob Kerr was still governor. They elected me the 45th senator, which gave me a desk, you know, which was kind of a joke, but
It was a nice
it is
honor.
a nice honor, you know, just as an honorary state senator. And so I did know them. And then when time came for somebody to succeed Bob Kerr, some of them were talking, you know. It doesn't take me a minute to talk you into it. You think you got a big thing going, but I didn't know the war was just over, and I wasn't. I sure didn't intend to run against some brand new war hero. And they started talking Ray McLean, and he was a good friend of mine, and a real fine man. And one day Ray came to me over at my office in the Hightower building. And he said, I've been back here a while now, and he said, I hear the talk around that you might be a candidate for governor. And I said, not against you. He said, I'm not going to run. He said, I'd like to see you run. So that's kind of opened the thing up. And so we made the race. And I did have the support of a good support of the legislature. I had a very harmonious legislature. We got along fine, and we had a lot of problems like I have out there now. See, that's the first post-war legislature.
Yeah.
After Bob Kerr couldn't do much. His hands were tied.
Right.
Even on road building, and the war was over, and he got a special gasoline tax that went off when I went in office of 2 cents to get some money.
Mm-hmm.
There was no income for roads. We had gasoline rationing and things like that, and the roads were in terrible shape. There was a lot to do, and the legislature went along with me real fine. I run into a bunch of them every now and then. They're around here now. It's some of the old timers, and a lot of new ones. And I feel very happy about it.
Well, obviously you had financial problems with the state, the same as you had
Well,
today.
I ran part of my platform was reducing the state income tax a third. It was too high. It was keeping business out of the state. You see, individuals got up to 9% pretty quick, and corporations to 6%. And that problem had been studied, and a legislative committee was recommending it also, and I ran on it as a part of the platform. I ran for the 8-member Highway Commission. So after I was elected and before I went in office, those bills were written before I was inaugurated. A few days. I was inaugurated on the 13th. But those bills were introduced. House Bill number 1 was introduced to reduce the income tax a third across the board and give the little taxpayers a bigger exemption to make it work for them too. And Senate Bill number 1 was the 8-member Highway Commission. And they went right through. We had a lot of other things, a whole lot of other things. We had teachers' salaries to adjust just like we do now, and I've forgotten just exactly how much we gave them. I think $400. And raised it starting maybe more than that. I'm just not sure, but in both sessions we had to do something about that. Had to finance the people who voted free textbooks. I had to finance that. We couldn't do it all. We just financed a part of it, some of the grades. And it's been, each time they take in a little more until they're getting the free textbooks. The people voted it, you had to do it. And the Teachers' Retirement Fund, I remember, it was new, it had to have some money. That was my first session. I mean, that was right to start off. We had a lot of adjustment to do.
Wow,
And
what
to
about this?
get all that money and cut taxes was quite a little job now.
I should judge. What about this $36 million bond issue?
Well, I think that's one of the finest things that happened in my administration. And that was after my second session. During the 2-year period between my first and second, a year and a half, about, I went to all the institutions. That's the Constitution says the governor should do that, and I did. And the more I went, the more I wanted to go. As I went to the mental hospitals, particularly, they were in terrible shape, and we were having quite a little bit of publicity about that. And so we didn't have the money to do what I wanted to do. So in the second session, I asked the legislature to submit to the people for a vote the $36 million bond issue for mental hospitals and higher education, mostly for mental hospitals. And we got government participation, which did a whole lot. And then, and to earmark, we had 7-cent cigarette tax. We had that. And to earmark 2 cents, what was necessary of 2 cents of our cigarette tax to retire the bonds. We weren't raising any taxes. Just taking our present tax and earmarking 2 cents of that cigarette tax, which was more than adequate. It proved that. I had some of the old timers. Oklahoma had never voted a bond, voted for bonds after the Budget Balancing Act in Governor Phillips' administration. It never voted. They voted down bonds all the time whenever they come up. And some of my good friends in the legislature thought they'd still vote this one down too. But this was my last chance to do anything about that problem. And I just didn't want to go out of office without trying it. I didn't want to go out with knowing the condition of these things and not trying to do something about it. And that's the only way we could do it. We just simply didn't have the money to do it any other way. And I had to take the lead, and I flew all over the state. And as I went, the thing commenced to pick up. You could tell, well, statistics. A lot of people are familiar, a lot are not. But I knew when I was looking at a crowd and talking to them that 1 out of 10 knew what I was talking about out there. They'd had somebody in their family somewhere. Jim Reinhardt is one of them that was skeptical, and he was my floor leader in that session. And the first talk I made was over in his county. They'd been working for a road down south of the river, Canadian River there, for 20-some years, and finally got it, and they wanted to have a barbecue and have me over there, and I could talk about the bonds. So we went over there. We had a good crowd. It rained. It rained just before that, but in spite of that, we had a good crowd. And as we went in, I went over to his house, and we drove down together. And as we went in, there was a fellow standing there, and he said, I want to shake hands with the governor. He told me he knew Jim. And when we walked away and started to go back down to where they're serving the barbecue, he said, when I was county judge, I committed that man's wife to the institution in Norman. And then we went on, and he did what he could, making the talk, and I talked. And as we started to leave, a fellow came up with a little boy in his arm, handicapped child. He said, I want to shake hands with the governor. I'll do all I can to help get this done. Jim said, let's go back to my house. He said, I need a drink. He said, you can't miss. He said, there's no taxes. You're doing something for those that can't help themselves, and you're not running for office. He said, you just keep it going. He said, we'll all. And as fast as I'd go, they pretty much got behind and helped me. But I had to be there. I had to go take the lead in it to get the people stirred up, because it was my program. And I think that's one of the finest things that I did. I'll probably be known much longer for the Turnpike, but that right out of my own heart is one of the
do something
one
for
of the
the-
best things I did, and within 2 years, we were right up the top in the country.
For the condition of the mental hospitals and so
Yes,
forth.
yes, in our mental health program, we were right up.
You think it's kept step now?
Yeah, I think maybe we need a little more. Maybe need to get after that a little bit if we can. They can do so much more now with the. They know how to do so much more now even than they did even then. And but it takes manpower and it takes money, it takes things that to carry out these
Well, it
programs.
costs so much more to run the state
Oh yes, well of
today
course.
than it did.
Yeah, we
say,
had
during the
we
era.
had to spend how we handled the $36 million. I called on all the professional people, the engineers, the architects, everybody that could help in an advisory capacity to serve on a committee. I appointed a citizens committee scattered around over the state to study and work with these professional people. And when I had called a special session to appropriate that money, and but when the legislature got here, the appropriation bills were all written. All they had to do is argue about them, find fault, or find mistakes, which they did. They found where some few mistakes had been made, but I saved out a couple of $1 million just to take care of things like that, and that didn't appropriate it because I knew that there would be some things come up that some of them wouldn't be satisfied with, and maybe they'd be right. And so we had the appropriation bills all written, and I didn't want to have to get in here and spend hold a special session until the next year, So we called it about I think the 30th of November. And I figured they'd go home for Christmas, and they did.
Well, it was quite a thing. It's gone down in history as one of the finest things that could happen.
But that committee and those professional people, they got right in, didn't get anything for it, just to help. And we got, they'd consult with they'd go to the institutions. They'd split up. And
Make on-the-site inspections.
Oh yes, and talk to the administrators there, and then they'd come up, and probably didn't any of them get as much as they would like to have, but it was well divided, and everybody was satisfied. They could see it.
Did you have any real problems or any major problems as when you were governor, rather? A big fight?
No, I had one. The only thing that happened that I know of, I found out I had one commission that I had to pretty much get rid of. And I did it one day, just asked for the resignation.
What commission was that?
Industrial Commission. Some of the attorneys had been telling me there's some things going on there, and what they were. I said, well, now you can't expect me. I said, if you know this, you bring me the evidence. They told me it was available. And I got it one morning, and they brought the stuff in, laid it on my desk, and I just called the old boy that was chairman. Innocent as he could be, they just pulled the wool over his eyes. He was a retired judge, good man, but he didn't know they were getting rid of him. Some of them, it didn't apply to the whole commission, but the ones that I knew were involved, I just called him and asked him for their resignation when I wanted it that day.
What about the Turnpike, Governor?
The Turnpike was, it was talked of some during Bob Kerr's administration. And then I didn't know much about it, but Mr. Gaylord and the Chamber of Commerce here and people at Tulsa, Chamber of Commerce, and folks over there, thought would work, or at least they wanted to try that. And one day somebody called out, and I don't think I talked with them, but somebody set up an appointment for a certain little group that wanted to talk to me. And I didn't know what they wanted to talk to me about. So there were enough of them that I asked us we'd meet in the Blue Room. Representatives from a group from Tulsa and from here, so on. And had an engineer with them that had done some studying on the project. Just kind of an eyeball study, so to speak, and how it might be done. And so the press was there. When we broke up, I said, well, gentlemen, this is very interesting. I'd like to have some more information about it. The press commenced to ask me, I said, are you for it or are you against it? I said, I told them just what I'm going to tell you. It's very interesting. I'd like to study it some. If it can be done, I'd like to do it. And, of course, I barely got the legislature to authorize it. I didn't have trouble in the House, but I got just by one vote in the Senate. It was a very controversial thing. And heck, I'd never talked about that when I was making a campaign. I didn't know anything about it, really. And but they authorized it, and I went to work to try to, and it was so close. I didn't even ask them for an appropriation. If these folks wanted it, I wanted them to put up some expense money for the feasibility report. Mm-hmm. And the engineers were telling me that it would take about $50,000. So I called that same bunch back to talk to me after I got the authorization and told them what the situation was. And I just did. It's so hot and controversial that I was lucky to get it passed. And I didn't want to ask them for any money. I said, I can get the money. Engineering firms have offered to do this, but you know what that's going to do to me? That's going to obligate me to them. Mm-hmm. And they just be able to write their own ticket, and I don't think you want me in that position. So I'm going to ask you folks to raise $50,000. If I sell the bonds, I'll pay you back. Mm-hmm. If I can't sell the bonds, there won't be any money to pay you. So Oklahoma City put up 25 and got people like they do around here now to sign $1,000 notes and things. And Tulsa put up 20, and Sapulpa put up 3, and the other towns in between, I had representatives from all of them. They raised money to fight me. So we employed what I thought, come recommended from the bond houses. You got to sell the bonds, so they recommended a certain firm in New York to do the traffic survey part of it, and they did. The bill did provide. The act did provide that the highway department could cooperate. They could furnish all of their information they had. The highway patrol could cooperate. You have to have them making a traffic survey, things like that. The bill authorized that. So we employed this. The authority did. I appointed 4 members, and I was a member. And we employed a New York firm, and they sent a fellow down here. After so long a time, he came in to me one day and said, I was to pay him $15,000. And then we had other expenses. We had to take some trips. The members of the authority, engineer from the highway department, and some legislators made the trip back over the Pennsylvania Turnpike. We had to know something about whatever there was to know about turnpikes, and then went on to Maine. They were just completing the Maine Turnpike. And but after so long, this fellow came in and said he was ready to make his report. And he said, "I'm sorry to tell you, you can't build it." Well, I said, "I don't want that kind of report. And it won't do me any good." I said, how much would it cost you to type up get your report like you want? He said, oh, I guess about $1,000. I said, well, I'd just like to give you a check, and less for what I owe you, less $1,000, and you just give me your work papers. But he said, I don't know. He said, I'll have to call my office. He said, I might get him to do it. I said, that's what I want. And the next day he came back, he said, they've agreed to do that. So I paid him off. I had this money where I could write the checks, you see, in a special account. I paid him off. So then I was right where we started, only worse off. If somebody got all those papers, it was against me and against the thing. And then I commenced to make inquiry around, and as I found out other governors were trying to do some things, including one, Governor Preston Lane of Maryland was trying to build a toll bridge across Chesapeake Bay. And he and I had problems in common. And so one day we were both on the executive committee of the Council of State Governments, and we had a meeting in Chicago. And I got in late. I think my plane was a little late, and the meeting was in progress when I got there. It was at the Edgewater Beach Hotel. And when the meeting broke up, he come running over. He said, how are you getting along your turnpike? I said, I'm not getting along at all. He says, come up the room, and I'll tell you how I built it. We went up there, and he told me about an engineer that pulled him out. He had his money and had his bridge going. And I knew this fella. He was a cattleman. He was a shorthorn breeder, Major Herschel Allen. And I'd seen him around the cattle shows. And it was C.E. Griner and Company in Baltimore. It was a firm. So he put a call in for him, and found him. We found him up on the beach on the coast at a resort place with his family taking a vacation. And so I was on my way to Washington, and then from there to New York. We were having an Interstate Oil Compact Commission meeting in New York. And so I followed right on through, and I told him, and I'd be in New York. He said, well, he'd come up to New York to see me. So he did, and we had lunch up there. I had to get out of some other meeting. It was part of the program. And he, the first thing we did when we sat down, started this, and he said, I want to ask you something. He said, when you asked the legislature to authorize this turnpike, you'd looked at it quite a bit, and just as a layman, not an engineer, not a finance man, do you think it'll work? And I said, I sure do, Major. Well, he said, it will. All you got to do is find the right people to help you. Well, I said, that's what I want to talk to you about. Are you available? He said, no, we can't do it. Our company got all we can do in South America, and we're all around. It's a big firm. But he said there are others that believe in these things. He said, you've got to find an engineering firm that believes these things, that believes in them. And he went over and mentioned several. Different projects that different engineering firms have done. And I kept listening awful close. I figured finally he'd come around to where I could tell which one he'd get if he could. And he mentioned the Lou Cather Company in Chicago, their headquarters. I thought more than anybody else. And I said, well, now, Mr. Lou Cather Company, tell me about them. Well, he said, if you can get them, he said, I don't know how they're fixed up. He said I think they'd do as good a job as anybody. And I said, well, I'm going to give them a whirl, see if I don't have much money left, but I'll try to see if they're interested. So I called him, and Mr. Cather came down. I told him the situation, and he told me he wasn't surprised. So at that time, I just had about $5,000 that I could pay him. And so he said, well, they'd like to take a whirl at it. So they got busy, and they came up with a pretty good report. It wasn't what the bankers wanted. They had an arbitrary figure in it, which was strictly an arbitrary one, that their feasibility study had to show 150% income against their obligations. In other words, for every $100 they put up, they had to see $150 income as a cushion because they're revenue bonds. No security. But that was an arbitrary figure, and he couldn't get it up there at 150% and protect his reputation as an engineer. It would have stood it if we found out sense, but he had to go with the rules. But he searched everywhere, got all the revenue he could do, and he came up with about 140%. And I worked on the RFC, which was in existence then. It's gone out of existence now. And I thought they could handle a thing like that. And they did send an engineer out. The engineer they sent out thought he'd done enough. He quit. I mean, he had all they wanted, but they were going to go ahead, and I don't know what got in the way. Somebody in the back room, some of those pencil pushers back there got some of the members of the RFC board and sold them out on it, and they ran out on me. I had a commitment that if their check showed 120%, they could let me have the money. And this fellow this firm got up to 127 and quit. He knew it. He wasn't getting much for his work, and so he thought he had all he needed. And they wanted to see the thing go too. So just about the time I was notified that they turned me down, I was getting madder every day and getting ready to go to Washington. And I got a call from a broker that specialized in revenue bonds, and I'd met him a couple of occasions. I met him in Florida and spent around the Indian Creek Club out there, played golf with him. And he'd been down here. I'd met him. He knew I was working on this thing, and when I was trying to work around the RFC, he was trying to help me over there. He had a fellow in Washington. About the time I was ready to explode, I got a call from him. He said if I'd send the attorney and the engineer to New York, get with Mitchell and Pershing, their attorneys, which their name are Cutlers or somebody, the firms that specialize in these things have to be on these bonds, or you don't get the bond. You don't get the money. The bond people want them. That he thought he could promise me a bid. I had to have a bid because it had to go to a bidder. I couldn't negotiate it. It had to be an open bid. And he thought he could guarantee me a bid. And I could go ahead and advertise the sale of bonds. So they went up there and stayed about a week, came back and said, well, he's going to make you a bid, but they want to work on this formula a little bit, how it's going to be paid off, just a little bit more. They want to study it, but they've gone far enough that he's going to guarantee a bid. So a few days, somebody came down. They sent down the thing, and attorneys and everybody went over it, and so I advertised the bonds. We had 5 syndicates bidding on them, and they were the one that guaranteed me the bid was the highest one. He was in Europe. They got in and handled some of the bonds, but they weren't the managing firm. And I had a limit of 4%, and some of the bonds some of the tail end bonds did go at 4%, but the average is 3.343, I think, something like that, on the bonds. And So we sold the bonds, and then it had to go through the court. The Supreme Court had to pass on it. It had to, everything had to be airtight before I could get the money. Got the money on the first day of December, and in the meantime...
What year was that?
1950. And in the meantime, between Tulsa and Sapulpa, there just had to be a road. There just had to be a road, either a 2-lane or a 4-lane road built. So the highway department was working on that right away, and they just went ahead and bought some extra right away in there. So if we did get the turnpike money, we'd get the turnpike built, we'd have the right of way for it. It would be a mistake to not buy it while you're buying. If you ever had to go back and ask for some more, well, you wouldn't have enough money to pay for it.
No.
And so they had the right of way. So as a result, we built a 2-lane road and then built the turnpike between Sapulpa. But I knew I was going to get the money. I had the date set to get the money on the 1st of December. We advertised for bids and let the first contract on the 19th. I went out of office on the 8th of January.
Well, that's closing up with a flourish, isn't it?
It sure is. It was a close call.
That's been a great success, hasn't it?
Oh, tremendous.
Fantastic success.
Oh, yes. It's nearly, the revenue is nearly 3 times. In some months it is 3 times enough to take care of all of the everything, the maintenance and service, interest, and the pay and the fund to pay the bonds off. Sometimes it's 3, some months.
How much money was involved in that turnpike?
Well, prices went up. I got 31 million, and Johnson Murray had to get 7 more, but he didn't have any trouble getting it.
38 million.
38 million. Yeah, steel got, we had a hard time getting steel for anything. And for a while, they were way behind, and then this Korean thing was bothering too. And so Johnson they just ran out of money, and they had to get some more, but they didn't have any trouble getting it. So, and
Well, there are quite a few accomplishments. It was a fine term.
well, I feel very fortunate in getting as much done as we did, because it was a lot of hard work. It was the hardest work I ever did. Let's see, the Ponca City paper, I think it was the day before yesterday, the Midwest paper has a little corner down in there, says what editors say, and they run something that each editor from each paper every day. Ponca City paper wrote an article on the governor succeeding himself. You know, that's being bounced around out
Right.
there. And he was good enough to say that Roy Turner was one that should have served longer. And Bob Kerr and mentioned others, Red Phillips.
What do you think of that, the governor succeeding himself?
It might be all right. It might be all right. I was so tired the time I got out, I wouldn't have had the energy, I don't think. I thought I was sick. But I was just tired.
Well, there aren't too many states left that the governors can't.
No, there's some. Missouri's one here. And we're much better off than with a 2-year term. That's a terrible thing. The 2-year business.
2 years, you can't even get your toes.
Oh, no.
A toehold in there.
Think about a state like Texas. Governor served in 2 years. They have to run everyone, that big place down there, every 2 years. They can run more than 4. And Arkansas's 2. Faubus is his sixth term, isn't it? 12 years.
Something like that. He set a record.
Yeah.
One of the real problems, I think, with a 2-year term is that most of the time the governor's in there, he's having to campaign for the next election.
Yeah, they sort of take it in those states for granted that he'll go at least 2 more years.
Mm-hmm.
They sort of take it for granted, but that isn't an assured fact that the people are going to do it. You know, they might might something come up and hit him.
You've kept track of politics since you've been out.
Yes, I think you don't ever get entirely detached from it because you feel like if you made you worked and tried to do something for the state, you want to see it continue to.
What shape do you
correct.
think we're in now?
Oh, I think they got financial problems out there, but they'll get something worked out on it. I think. They just got to meet it some way.
Do you think the redistricting of the legislature will have any effect?
No, I think they got to meet it regardless of that. I don't believe that's going to have any effect on the financing, and that's just their big problem.
And you've stayed active in the city affairs, I know, and all civic
Yes,
activities.
as we were going through this town up here, having to get this elections passed and things, I had no city council and people like that too.
Well, you served on so many committees and
Yes,
contributed your time and your efforts
yeah.
to activities, and you're still working hard on Cowboy Hall of Fame.
Well, it's about out of the woods now. That work's done. About all I do now is sign checks for Glenn Ferris when he brings them down. I signed a lot up here a while ago. I think we were fortunate in being able to get a fine director.
Yes.
I think Dean Cradle is a real.
He's well versed in being a curator of something like that.
Well, he's more than that. He's a director. He's hired some staff members, which would be curators, you'd call.
Mm-hmm.
And somebody knows how to set up an exhibit and things, and to help him accumulate it, he's got to have a lot of stuff here by next May if we're going to open that thing and have it set up ready to go. But I believe he can do it. And,
Well, do you think this bustling city of ours is going to keep up its momentum?
I think so, unless something happens to the whole economy, I think it's going to sure go. It just seems to me like it's.
We're talking to a man today who's been here quite a number of years, very active. O.A. Cargill, as a matter of fact.
Yes.
And he said he wouldn't be surprised to see within the next decade that we almost double our population.
Well, he told me that. I had occasion to see him here not so long ago. In fact, I got to see him again a few days ago. He's got a client that some folks would like to make a deal with, and they knew I knew him, and they came to me, and I went to see him about it. And I've known him since when I was working at Morrison Company, figuring beef costs out there. He was running the streetcar, and he'd bring me in every night about 9 o'clock. I had to get those sheets out and get them in the mail. Chicago, Kansas City, St. Joe, and Omaha.
He's led a colorful life, hasn't he?
He has. And then he became a policeman. All the time he was studying law. Got to be a lawyer, be mayor. He had a real colorful life.
He's still as enthusiastic as he was when he was.
It's amazing at his age. You know where he lives?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, out on MacArthur. And he said he rides, he's got a horse out there that's pretty spirited. And he said he rides him at 6 o'clock every morning.
That's what he said.